Russia has now outspent all of Europe in defense, a stunning shift that has sent shockwaves through NATO capitals. The revelation comes as the US, under President Donald Trump, prepares for Pentagon budget cuts while pushing allies to shoulder more of their own defense burden. The latest figures from the International Institute for Strategic Studies estimate Russia's defense spending in 2024 at $145.9 billion, or 6.7% of its GDP. But here's the real shocker. When adjusted for purchasing power parity, Moscow's actual military expenditure skyrockets to approximately $462 billion, surpassing the combined defense budgets of all European nations, which stood at $457 billion last year. In response to these eye-opening figures, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth doubled down on Trump's demand for NATO allies to step up their military spending.
Part of this is speaking frankly with your people about how this threat can only be met by spending more on defense. 2% is not enough. President Trump has called for 5%, and I agree. Increasing your commitment to your own security is a down payment for the future, a down payment, as you said, Mr. Secretary, of peace through strength. We're also here today to directly and unambiguously express that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland.
Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has raised the alarm, calling on member nations to drastically increase defense budgets to 3% of GDP to counter the Kremlin's military surge.
Russia at this moment is spending 40% of its state budget on defense, is spending almost 10% of its national income on defense. And of course you have to have the purchasing power figured in those numbers. If we do not take some difficult decisions this year about, yes, Ukraine, obviously, but also about defense spending, doing much, much more than the 2% we pledged in Wales, and those not yet on 2%, please get there before summer. But also on production. We have to make sure that we produce enough. And this is a problem not only for the European part of NATO, but also the US part of NATO. Because all of us, from California up to and including Ankara, we are not producing enough.
Long critical of NATO's military spending shortfalls, has now issued his most radical demand yet: 5% of GDP for defense, a figure that would add nearly $800 billion to military budgets across Europe. That's almost double Russia's current defense expenditure. Yet even as Trump pushes allies to spend more, his administration is simultaneously exploring deep cuts to the Pentagon's own budget. The move is part of a sweeping government cost-cutting plan led by billionaire Elon Musk, who heads the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency.
A lot of those countries weren't even paying, the NATO countries. They weren't paying. Only 7 out of 28 were paying. We were one of them. And Poland was one. And they had a few of them that were paying, and some were paying very proudly. Usually the closer to the borderline of Russia they were, the faster they paid, okay? The ones that were further away tended not to pay so fast. And one thing on that, I think they should lift their number not to 2%, but to 5%. NATO should be at 5%, not at 2%. 2% is ridiculous, yeah.
The Pentagon's $890 billion budget could be slashed dramatically as Musk's team vows to cut $2 trillion in federal spending, and military expenditures will not be spared.
Redundancies and headcounts at headquarters that need to be addressed. There's just no doubt.
While Washington debates these cuts, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has sounded a dire warning. Without sustained US support, Ukraine's fight against Russia could collapse. Looking ahead, the Kremlin shows no signs of slowing down. Russia's military spending is projected to surge by another 13.7% this year, hitting $173.5 billion, a staggering 7.5% of its GDP. With Europe racing to catch up, NATO now faces a moment of reckoning as the global military balance shifts dramatically from Brussels to Moscow.